I hope it's okay.
Whew. It feels to me like with that, we just might as well just stay in silence and take each other in. What a beautiful introduction. Thank you very much. I'd like to start off by confessing to an extreme level of nervousness as I stand here. I'm particularly nervous for two reasons. The first is that I'll be sharing a personal story, and that it is quite messy and pain-filled. The second is that I have not shared parts of what is in there publicly before. So I appeal to you that whatever you may be able to offer me as a holding, you give it over, and I accept it with gratitude. So, I am a 58-year-old South African black woman, and I say that word black to take us all into a space. I was born and raised in a township in the outskirts of a city of Durban in South Africa, and this was in apartheid times. And living in townships, especially townships designated as African townships, was not that easy. The space was hard in so many different ways. I was the last of three sisters. My mother was a nurse, my father was a social worker, and just by virtue of their education and line of work, they would have fallen into the category of the elite in the township. We were not wealthy, but as children, we really were teased at school about being the haves. Our parents, trying to do the best they could with raising children in apartheid South Africa, developed an approach to life of making our home environment very, very restrictive. That was their attempt to bring safety in light of the enormous dangers of the spaces we had been thrown into. So, visiting neighbors, playing and engaging with other children in the neighborhood were just prohibited, strictly prohibited, and so was playing on the streets. So we also always watched from the fence. This meant that as I grew up, I was a young person with a lot of closing up. In my whole being, there was a lot of closing up. And this closing up manifested itself in my whole life and in very, very surprising and unforeseen ways, but with enormous contradiction as well. So much contradiction that at the age of 19, I was a mother to my first son and a married woman. At the age of 20, I had completed a 4-year law degree, and at 22, 2 years after, I had completed a post-grad law degree. And at the age of 24, my marriage had broken down in a bloody, violent incident. And 4 days after that, I was on a plane to study for my master's in law, with a major focus in human rights at the London School of Economics, and that was my first trip out of the country. And as these contradictions mark themselves, I recall the sense of leaving my 2 precious children, Sheikani at 5 years and Ricardo at 14 months, to go away for this 12-month period to study, laced with leaving a marriage. It didn't even occur to me that I needed some counseling, nor did it occur to anybody around me that this is what was needed in this space. I just carried on. At the age of 33, I fell in love with a good comrade of mine, and we had met in the struggle. He's a beautiful soul who to this day exudes goodness and infectious generosity and love and kindness. And 8 months into that relationship, we woke up to people who had broken into the house, and they held us in for hours. They tortured and beat us up, threatened to kill us, and they, at some point, removed me from where Kumi was, and he reports about that incident afterwards and says it was the longest 2 hours of his time. I, of course, had protection to some extent, in that my mind shut off what they had done. And so I was informed by Kumi that the pain that I was carrying in my elbow would have come from the beating up and the dragging as they were dragging me out of the room. So even in that instance, even though I was the CEO of the South African Human Rights Commission at that time, I couldn't bring myself to walk the journey of counseling. I couldn't see myself through sitting and relaying what had happened to me to anybody. So after the second session of trauma counseling, I dropped it. And of course, there were consequences of all of that. The unintegrated memory involved me in reenactments of that incident. And unfortunately, Kumi bore the brunt of those reenactments, as they would happen in the night, and he would be positioned in the reenactment as the assailants. So this shutting off I'm telling you about is emerging in all these ways. But then my 24-year-old son gets to be admitted to rehab. And that's where everything shrunk and expanded for me. I became the smallest entity as I prayed huge prayers, didn't know what to do with myself. And that's where I was thrown into a journey of deeper inquiry, a journey of spirituality, a journey of openness to the meaning of life, openness to self-relatedness, self-suffering, the causes of suffering. And I went into it with hope. I built community around it. Community sustained me. And life has been a progressive engagement with the question of who are we? What are we called to do? What does it mean to be connected? On the 23rd of February this year, while I was at Oxfam, South Africa, serving as the acting executive director there, our precious son, Ricardo, who's a well-known and well-loved artist and known by the name Ricky Rick, he died. In his studio, he had hung himself. I lost all containers that made sense to me. Some 25 days into that, I was climbing Mount Everest to base camp because I had to make sense. I had to answer the question, what is the moment calling for? How am I to be at this moment? What is the possibility of continuing in this state? Of course, there was a huge outpouring of love from everywhere, literally everywhere. People had been touched by Ricardo's life, and that was a gift in this time of immense grief. The ability to see Ricardo's death not only as the pain that stops everything, because I did drop everything. I dropped the job, I dropped everything. I just could not be. I didn't know. I didn't know who I was. the ability to hold that outpouring of love with a vision of that calling that says, come. See the spiritual moment in this very, very dark, painful space was there with me. So as I climbed up to Mount Everest Base Camp, I met with Ricardo. In spirit, we communed. We had a huge exchange of revelation about how my life, which had caused a lot of damage in many places, including, by the way, damage that relates to how I misused resources that were placed in my personal space. I just did not manage money, resources in the way that would serve to the best of its possibility my family and the community that would have benefited. All of this came up in this encounter, which for me was a series of spirited moments that said Ricardo's legacy lives on in us doing the best that we can. And I continue to commit to the Ricardo Foundation for Artivism. Thank you.